It has been a long time since I have written one of these letters. I feel that I have slowed in my old age and found less time to report my findings. As I stated last time we spoke, I had found myself drawn to continue my studies as an arcanist, with an emphasis on shards and intents. This is the abstract for my final essay submission to the universities here, and I wish to send you this summary until I can deliver a physical copy for your safekeeping. Title page: Allomancy of the Final Empire. As part of my application to the universities and establishments of Silverlight, I, Elsric de Morris, humbly submit this analytical essay. This essay is the first in a series that will outline the interaction of the investitures found on Scadrial through the ages, as well as a conceptualization of the powers, intents, and consequences of the abilities native to Scadrial. The documentation of the Scadrian system has been sporadic in nearly all cases. As far as I know, the publications of Chryssala are the only comprehensive essays examining the early Scadrian system that exist in the library. The following essays will define the various investitures as well as document theorized physical, cognitive, and spiritual effects of native Scadrian powers. This first essay will primarily be a historical examination of Allomancy, the backbone of the Final Empire and the world of Ash. The political, economic, and military bearing of Allomancy will be brought to light. I will also explore the physical limitations and capabilities of the 8 basic metals and the 2 high metals as they were known at the time. My original transcripts will also contain diagrams and physical calculations as best I can determine. It is said that the Mists of Scadrial gave birth to the first of the Mistborn, hence the name. It is oddly fitting, even if the majority of these claims are apocryphal at best. The history of Allomancy in the Final Empire is brutal and succinct. The Lord Ruler, the immortal god of the world of Ash, stepped out of the mountains and granted unto his chosen servants the power of Allomancy. These founders then passed their gifts to their children and their children's children through the ages. These family lines would be the backbone of the empire and the nobility. Because of the heavy legal emphasis on breeding, the lines of succession remained relatively stable, although time eventually saw a steady blending between the nobility and the enslaved Ska peasant populations. This dual caste system pervaded the empire completely, with the only effective middle class being an anomaly made of the lawless common and thieves. This social structure and the iron fist of the Lord Ruler ensured that his political structure remained stable and mostly unchanged for a millennium. Allomancers came in 2 forms. The Mistings were the majority of investiture users in the Final Empire, each person having access to just one allomantic ability. These individuals were highly desired and greedily sought by noble houses. Mistborn were the far rarer manifestation. With the ability to use any of the allomantic metals, these individuals were nearly priceless for their utility as spies and assassins. Mistborn were far from invincible, but one Mistborn was more effective than a small army. During the Final Empire, there were 10 metals that were used by those gifted as allomancers. The basic 8 were grouped into 2 separate categories: physical and mental allomancy. In turn, each classification had 2 allomantic pairings, a pure element and a companion alloy. These pairings often reflected each other in effect or cause. A continuation of classifications includes external and internal metals, external having an effect beyond the allomancer, while internal causing the allomancer to be altered in some way. This distinction is much clearer than the pushing and pulling classifications. I feel that the term push and pull became part of the diction of the people of Scadrial based on the effects of iron pulls and steel pushes, which perform dramatic visual effects of pushing and pulling on physical metals. However, I feel that this distinction begins to break down when applied to the other metals, but this may be a personal idiosyncrasy. As far as the specific details of the metals and how they fall into these subcategories will be continued in future essays. For now, I wish to outline the elements and alloys that made up the core 10. Of the 8 basic metals, we will look at the distinction between physical metals and mental metals. The 4 physical metals are iron, steel, tin, and pewter. Iron and steel exert a physical force on the source of metal that are outside of the physical body and that are within range of the allomancer's reach. Steel pushes outward while iron pulls inward. The distance where the metal can be affected is determined by the physical size of the manipulated object, as well as the distance between the allomancer and the object being pushed or pulled. Large metal objects are more accessible from further away. The allomancer can see his or her connection to the metals around them via blue lines, which connect them from their center of gravity to the metals themselves. Pewter and tin are internal metals that change the physical body of the Allomancer. Pewter grants greater physical strength and endurance. This additional strength does not come from an increase in muscle mass or bone density. Instead, it seems to be a strength lent by the actual burning process. Upon closer study, I became very excited by the implications of this, as you will see in my following essays. Tin is the other physical enhancement metal which increases the senses of the Allomancer. Allomancers who burn tin receive a burst of sensory information all at once. Everything is noticed in a heightened state. Tin burners, or tin eyes, are susceptible to sudden changes in the environment such as bright lights and loud noises. These changes cause a sensory overload that can stun the Allomancer in question. On the other hand, this overstimulation can be used to clear one's mind when it becomes clouded or disoriented. Tin enhances the senses that already exist, and there is no change to the outer organs of the Allomancer. Therefore, it seems that the mind's ability to comprehend is what changes, rather than the change in sensory data. While this has been a simplified look at physical metals, I wish to impress the reader with an understanding that these metals are not simple in the slightest. The changes that these physical metals make are curious and perhaps unique as a form of investiture, but for the purposes of this opening essay, I will move on. My theories and descriptions of these metals will be explained in much greater detail in the following essays, which are dedicated to them. This also goes for mental allomantic powers. The first pairing, copper and bronze, are understandably complementary. Bronze allows the user to detect when an individual within range is using allomancy. This was often used by members of the policing and religious organizations of the Final Empire to find ska mistings who were performing illegal activities with their powers. They were also used in the inner dealings of the greater noble houses, to learn about the abilities and actions of their rivals. Copper is the alternative, which when burned creates a cloud of allomantic interference. The copper misting, or smoker, creates a field that blocks bronze allomancers or seekers from being able to detect allomancy. Smokers were essential in the underworld, in order for these ska mistings to work without a great fear of discovery. Smokers were also immune to emotional manipulation while burning their metal. The final pairing in the core 8 metals are zinc and brass. These are fascinating in that they sway existing emotions of people outside of the Allomancer. The Allomancer could target a single individual or a small group or congregation. These metals do not allow mind control or even emotional control. Instead, they act as a catalyst or a dilution of emotion. Zinc Allomancers are called rioters because they inflame emotion. Much like how music in a performance can heighten an emotional experience of an audience member, rioters provide shortcuts for emotion, causing them to swell powerfully and encourage emotional responses. Predictably, brass does the opposite. Brass Allomancers, or soothers, smother emotions gently, calming and stabilizing the emotions of others. If overdone, these soothers tend to make people feel dull or potentially lethargic. These two are not as simple as their counterparts. Emotions are complex in sentient beings, and thus these abilities are much less effective, unless the Allomancer can grasp the emotions a person is feeling. Then they can encourage or suppress as they feel is best. Next we will look at the temporal effects of gold and atium. Gold is perhaps the most unusual of the metals. When burned, the Allomancer has a strange perception switch, where they seem to split into two. It is still unclear as to the nature of this splitting. However, it is safe to assume that the duplicate is a shadow of who the Allomancer could have been had different choices been made. However, this is strangely subjective, for there are limitless possibilities in a person's past, yet gold only shows one alternative. I explore these implications later, but I am very much at a loss as to what the metal really does. My conclusions are more like concepts, and will need further investigation. And finally, atium, the literal backbone of the imperial society and economy. Atium was by far the most valuable metal in the Final Empire. When burned, this metal allows the Allomancer to see into the future. Not only is this an extension of the senses into the future, but it is an expansion of the mind, so the Allomancer can process the information almost by instinct. The metal was incredibly rare and burned very quickly. As long as the Allomancer burned this metal, they were effectively invincible for all intents and purposes. There are only two confirmed dangers to an Allomancer who is burning atium. Either they need to be maneuvered into a position where there is no possible escape, or they must be confronted by an opponent who can also burn atium. While the powers of atium are incredible, the effects of the imperial markets and the noble houses may have been even more significant. Despite the alluring power of this metal, it is these additional consequences that created the greatest changes and effects in the Final Empire. This archaic look into the past reminds me of just how far we have come in our understanding of the Cosmere. Like many cultures I've stumbled upon, the people of Scadrial wield these powers without understanding what they are doing with the investiture. Thus it is important that we study and understand where this information started. Although this essay is simplistic in its diction, remember that this is the foundation for more advanced information to be found in the essays that follow. However, I feel that context is imperative for the reader, so I highly encourage that you do not seek out my other publications on the people of Scadrial until you have made yourself familiar with the legends of the Hero of Ages. I will follow up shortly with a continuation in these essays. Until the next time, Elsric.